Hello and welcome to Perspectives in Professional Psychology. I'm Dr. Lance Garrison, Dean of the College of Professional Psychology at the Chicago School. Join me as we explore the cutting-edge work of our faculty, alumni, and students across a diverse array of specialty within the fields of professional psychology. In this episode of Perspectives in Professional Psychology, I had a great conversation with Dr. Joshua DeFilippo. Dr. DeFilippo serves as a professor for the Educational Specialist and PsyD School Psychology programs at the Chicago School. Dr. DeFilippo is actually an alum of the Chicago School and received his doctoral degree in school psychology with an emphasis in school neuropsychology. For over a decade, Dr. DeFilippo served in charter and public school settings as a practicing school psychologist. And while working in schools, Dr. DeFilippo also served as a site supervisor for beginning, intermediate, and advanced practicum students. Dr. DeFilippo is also a diplomat for the American Board of School Neuropsychology. He started with the Chicago School as an adjunct professor in 2016, teaching statistics, psychometrics, educational and behavioral assessments, school-based interventions, and biological and cognitive bases of behavior. He joined the core faculty of the Chicago School in 2023. His current research and consultation interests are in the areas of trauma-informed approaches to students in crisis, utilizing data analytics in schools, and integrating neuropsychological assessments within the multi-tiered system of supports. Dr. DeFilippo and I had a great conversation on the topic of math anxiety, so stay tuned for more. Well, hello, Dr. DeFilippo. I appreciate you joining us today on Perspectives in Professional Psychology. I know you're one of our esteemed faculty members at the Chicago School, but would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, I just actually finished my first year as a full-time faculty member at the Chicago School as an assistant professor in the school psychology department. But I served as an adjunct professor since 2016. So I'm approaching my 15th year as a licensed and practicing school psychologist, and I'm a diplomat with the American Board of School Neuropsychology. So yeah, my areas of study include like practical ways we can utilize applied behavioral statistics and neuropsychological assessment intervention design to help influence system theory, particularly around schools.
Okay, fantastic. I know that, well, I'll just start by saying you and I share school psychology in common.
Yeah.
I have my master's degree in school psychology and have worked in a variety of public schools in the North Texas area. So it's good to be on with another school psychologist. You wrote an article for the Chicago School blog not too long ago about math anxiety. And I was wondering if we could dig into that a little bit and maybe just start by, it sounds kind of obvious, but what is math anxiety and how does it impact kids?
That's a very deep question to ask. We can go in multiple different directions. When I first started as a school psychologist, a lot of the field, their focus was, on the social aspects, behavioral aspects.
Yeah.
Again, when you say psychologist, everyone thinks of, the couch and laying down and,
That's right.
Psychoanalysis, things like that. But
there's a mental image that comes up for people, right?
Yeah. And again, when I tell people I'm a school psychologist, that's right where they go to.
Yeah.
But I actually went into the field because, growing up, I struggled academically. And I didn't have like a school psychologist to kind of be there to kind of say, oh, this is what's going on, and those kind of things. And so I did have math anxiety growing up. I also had reading anxiety, I had a bunch of different anxieties and so forth. So my direction was actually more towards the academics. Now, when you go to the academic side of school psychology, everything's into reading. Like you're familiar with our current tests, the KTEA and the Wyatt.
Yes.
There are like 15, 16, 17 different subtests that all encompass reading, and we have like 3 for math. So a lot of attention is going towards reading, and math oftentimes gets put on the back burner. So again, there's been a lot of talk, in the research and literature, but also in the media on how, with gender, you always focus, boys are more scientific and with math. And so we see this decrease in performance, with females, in their performance in math, and it could be more of the cultural perspective.
Yeah.
But generally math gets put on the back burner, and even boys get, anxious, with math. And so it starts at a young age and it develops. And now I work with grad students and they shiver and they cower whenever you hear the word statistics and we talk about numbers. And when we try to, for dissertation students, they always want to do the qualitative research because they get scared of doing the numbers and the methodologies with the quantitative pieces.
Yeah.
So that anxiety kind of starts young and works its way all the way up.
Yeah. Carries through life.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've taught statistics in the past, and I perceive myself as a very supportive instructor when I'm teaching statistics. But I often tell the story that I've taught many different kinds of courses in clinical psychology curriculum, but I've never had students cry as much as they do in statistics. And again, I'm trying to be as supportive as I can, but I know that for so many people, there is this kind of deep-seated anxiety that goes along with it because, and I mean, you certainly understand the academic focus on reading. It's critical. I mean, for a lot of kind of quantitative activities, you still have to read to get to the place to understand what to do quantitatively. But there's so little focus on that, I think, that kids who come up through the school system who struggle with math do kind of develop a lifelong, long-standing anxiety with it that carries through even to doctoral, students in clinical psychology, and I'm sure in other fields as well. So I guess maybe a two-part question. What do we change systemically to help, address that issue of math anxiety? And then maybe on a more granular level, as a school psychologist, what do you see as some effective interventions to help people deal with math anxiety?
Well, from a neuro perspective, we always say there's bottom up versus top down, and we'll have to do both. It's our new nature versus nurture. Do we start from the bottom and work our way up, or do we start from the top and work our way down? And sadly, the answer is, well, both. So from the bottom up, that comes a lot down to parents, but also us consulting with parents and working with parents. And again, gradually showing kids in a very non-stressful way how math is in everyday life. So I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'm from Chicago. This is my first summer. I went to a Cubs game. And I had a good time. I'm not a huge sports fan to begin with, but I was sitting there in the bleachers and I was looking at the stats and the numbers on the board. And I got this fascination with it because you see the different players and they have their stats, kind of like the old school baseball cards. So again, when you're at a fun event like that, pointing things out to kids like, oh, look, what do you think these numbers mean? And it's a very non-threatening and a very fun atmosphere where they're watching a sports game and you're tying math into it and applying math and concepts into different situations. Like I said in the article, when you're cooking and they're watching you and they want to help you out and you start talking about math and you're like, okay, this is supposed to make, 7 cookies, but if we double the recipe, how many do you think we'd get? And again, having those conversations. So that would be an example of like bottom up. Top down, as we're working with grad students who, again, you're saying cry or shiver or get scared of statistics, trying to make it as realistic or applied as possible, and then breaking it down so it's not as intimidating. And it's getting down to the root of the question. So again, as scientists, if we see something, that's all it is. We're just seeing, we can't really prove anything unless we can measure it. We start by explaining it that way. We see things every day, but in reality, it's just our perceptions that kind of piece it together. It's a storyline we put in our head. But if we actually quantitatively measure, we can say, well, no, this is a coincidence. This just happened by chance, or, and so forth. And it kind of explaining it that way and saying, if this was a coincidence, what are the likelihood? What is the chances of this actually happening or falling into place as we're observing it? And so that would be an example of like a top down of how we can start, easing some of that anxiety when people already have it to begin with walking in to the classroom.
It sounds silly to say it out loud, but I think in some ways it needs to be called out. And that's what you're touching on a little bit, is that numbers are everywhere. They pervade almost every aspect of our life. And we're applying all the time, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, quantitative reasoning skills that we have. We couldn't get through our day-to-day lives without being able to do that. But if you kind of pull those numbers out of context, if you pull the need to quantitatively reason out of context and you put it on a piece of paper in front of someone and say, I need you to calculate this statistic, or I need you to do this long division, all of a sudden, since it's out of context, there's a subset of people that the generalization becomes more difficult. But if you can say, look, this is no different, it's contextually different, right? And that's important. But you use numbers all the time. You have good quantitative reasoning skills, or at least passable, right? You can get by in life, but it's no different than looking at a baseball card or the board at a baseball game and thinking about batting average. So if someone has a 250 batting average, what does that mean? So you could kind of, in that context, it's less threatening, more comfortable, and you can kind of work through it from a reasoning perspective. But put that in a word problem, and all of a sudden, I'm scared, I'm anxious. So normalizing the quantitative reasoning process sounds like it's a critical component of helping deal with math anxiety.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And again, we can use it to actually, let people see kind of outside their current, perspectives of how they see things.
Sure.
When you start playing math or using data in a quantitative way, for the example that comes to mind is, when we're working in schools and they want to refer kids, again, I always try to you have to reject or retain the null hypothesis, meaning, okay, you're bringing this kid. Is this something actually going on, or are you projecting something onto them? So I look at the overall data. So I said, well, the kid is, failing, or their performance on these standardized tests are very low. Okay, that's a number, and it's very easy to see that number. But then taking a step back and saying, well, if 60% of the kids in that grade level or 60% in that class are scoring similar,
Right.
there is no difference.
Yeah.
So what else might be going on there? So again, look, like bringing numbers into the conversation in a non-intimidating way, where people are maybe more tunnel vision, as you were kind of saying it, or they're just looking at one thing, but when you mention it, to look at it from a different perspective, that adds another viewpoint or perspective.
For sure. From a kind of the perspective of school psychology as a profession, Dr. DeFilippo, how well prepared do you think school psychologists are broadly to kind of understand this type of anxiety? Is there more we can be doing as a field? And I know we're talking about math anxiety, but you mentioned early on in our conversation that so much of thinking in school psychology is directed toward the social, emotional, behavioral piece. That sometimes we exclude the more academic side of school psychology and what kinds of evidence-based principles we can bring to bear to help kids struggling academically. Do you feel like as a field we're well prepared to shift our focus and to help those kids on that side of the challenge spectrum?
Yeah, I think we're capable.
Yeah.
We're definitely capable. The question is, are we really moving in that direction? And it doesn't look like we're necessarily moving in that direction. Like I said, math has always been on the back burner, and I don't see it moving forward. Like I said, when we are looking at our tests and our assessments, they're not really pulling math up to the forefront. And if anything, we're looking at writing. Are we now moving towards more digital forms of assessment of writing versus more handwritten?
Yes.
Again, math is still on that back burner. With COVID, there was a lot of, and again, this is a legit concern with, social emotional, when
Right.
during COVID, everyone was
Yeah.
restricted to their home. That did impact people's socialization, including kids, both adults and kids. You put them back together, it was kind of a bad mix. And so again, a lot of attention went in that direction. So it's really hard to say we're moving in that direction, but again, that doesn't mean it's completely out. You have certain people that are coming up. I'm a fan of Stephen Pfeiffer. He actually designed his own standalone math assessment test. It's not perfect, but again, compared to nothing,
Yeah. It's a good starting point.
It's a good start. It's a great starting point. So yeah, we're capable, but there's so many competing conflicts out there for us school psychs to kind of tackle at once. And so the best is people to specialize.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting too, because having worked as a school psychologist, my experience is that in terms of what we're called on to assess and intervene has a lot to do with what's disruptive to the classroom norm, right? If the kid is kind of stepping outside of the norm behaviorally or emotionally and disrupting the classroom environment in some way, those are the kids that get put on the slate for the school psychologist or other kind of behavioral specialist in the school system. All the while, that kid with math anxiety, who's not necessarily acting out, but could really benefit from the skill set of a school psychologist, gets left out of the intervention mix. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah, and that's why it's very important to look at numbers, pulling the numbers back in.
Right.
It's very easy, to look at a single case and be like, oh, there's a lot going on with this, without looking at the big picture, again, that tunnel vision. And so, but again, I get worried about the kids that aren't being brought to my door,
Yeah.
that are not being recognized. Because it's easy to put all your attention and all your eggs in one basket. And again, it's very easy to paint a picture of a kid when they're referring a kid. But again, I get nervous because it's like, okay, this is a squeaky wheel because they're making noise.
Yeah,
But
right. Yeah.
that they're still going on, but they're not making that same noise.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Well, Dr. DeFilippo, I've enjoyed our conversation. Are there maybe one or two takeaways from our conversation today that you want to make sure people who watch this episode carry with them?
Specifically to stay on topic with math.
Yeah, let's stay with math. But
Um,
I'm open to anything else you have to offer.
yeah, so I think the takeaway is to ease in. Math is everywhere. Start with yourself. Be more aware, be more cognizant. And it could be as simple as you have to make it to a certain destination, let's say a meeting that's important at a certain time, and you're looking at the time and you have to do math in your head, how to calculate when you're going to get there a little bit early so you don't, who knows what happens from there. Simple things, but being aware that that involves math.
Yeah.
So the first step is awareness and paying attention to yourself, because then you can point it out to others. So that's a good starting point for both top down and bottom up. So
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, time management is everything, and time management is math.
yeah. So, and again, you didn't think about that, or one doesn't think about that until it's brought to their attention. So again,
Yeah.
that awareness, talking about it and having conversations with both adults as well as kids.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Again, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Perspectives in Professional Psychology, and I look forward to speaking to you again sometime in the future.
Thank you for joining us on Perspectives in Professional Psychology. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making a difference in your communities. If you would like more information about the professional psychology programs offered at the Chicago School, please visit us at thechicagoschool.edu.